Hello, and welcome to my tutorial about prices. In this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about prices and how they're determined in a competitive market. Then I'm going to talk about what may make prices change, and that's anything that changes the willingness and ability of consumers to buy a given good or service, and or anything that changes the willingness and ability of producers to sell that good or service. You see immediately where I'm going with this. Anything that changes demand and or changes supply will result in us having, in principle, a different price. Prices can do something extraordinary. They signal the relative worth of goods and services, and this tells the economy what and how much to produce of that good or service. Prices are determined when the wills of buyers and sellers meet, and these wills are translated into curves, the demand curve and the supply curve respectively. In a competitive market, prices adjust to ensure that the quantities that the consumers wish to buy match the quantities that the producers wish to sell. There are no shortages and surpluses, just a warm and fuzzy equilibrium. When the wills of buyers and or of sellers change, a new equilibrium is found. A very important distinction one must make is that between demand and quantity demanded and that between supply and quantity supplied. So very quickly, demand represents the inverse relationship between a product's price and the quantity that consumers are willing to buy, or quantity demanded. Changes in demand are caused by changes in variables other than the price of that product. For example, a change in consumer income. Now listen, would you drive the same car if you won the lottery tomorrow? I wouldn't. I'd go buy something really, really nice. Changes in demand could also be caused by a change in the price of a related good. For example, would you keep wanting to buy as much jam for your PB&J sandwiches if the price of peanut butter tripled? I don't think so. And you can think of other determinants of demand that may change. Similarly, supply represents the positive relationship between a product's price and the quantity producers are willing to sell, or quantity supplied. Changes in supply are caused by changes in variables other than the price of that product. For example, a change in the price of an input. Imagine a baker who faces an increase in the price of flour or sugar. He would no longer be willing to sell the same number of loaves of bread as before at the same price as before. It's more likely that he'd want to sell less. Similarly, a decrease in the number of firms producing that product would also affect supply. Imagine what the closing of nearby bakeries does to the amount of bread available at a given price. Now, going back to our pretty graphs, when any of the determinants of demand and or of supply change, we have one or more new curves and a new equilibrium as well. Let's take a look at several different scenarios. For example, when supply increases, a new equilibrium occurs at a lower price level and a greater quantity is traded. When supply decreases, equilibrium occurs at a higher price level and a smaller quantity is traded. If demand increases, at the original supply, we see a new equilibrium occurring at a higher price with a higher quantity being traded. When both supply and demand increase, we know that quantity traded will be higher, although we don't really know what happens to price. When demand increases but supply decreases, we know that the equilibrium price is now higher, but don't know what happens to equilibrium quantity. When demand decreases, at the original supply, we see a new equilibrium at a lower price and a lower quantity traded. If both demand and supply decrease, we don't know what happens to equilibrium price, but know that quantity traded will be lower. When demand decreases but supply increases, we know equilibrium price is now lower, but don't know what happens to equilibrium quantity. So when any of these changes occur, sometimes we don't know the direction of the change in one of the variables. It all depends on the magnitude of the change. This is a very nifty graph with a lot of equilibria right here. Thank you very much for watching.